The sun was sinking low over the wide open plains, turning the whole world the color of hammered copper. Heat shimmered off the hard-packed ground, and every sound carried far: horses snorting, wagons creaking, boots clacking against porch planks. But louder than all that were the voices on the main street, rough and jeering, as they so often were when the rancher walked into town for supplies. He kept his eyes down, hands steady on the reins of his old chestnut mare. He didn't look at the men leaning against the saloon's railings. Didn't answer the ones who elbowed each other and snickered as he passed. Didn't rise to the insults tossed his way like trash on the wind. He had learned long ago that nothing he said would change their minds. Words meant little in this land unless you could back them with a gun or with stories of women or whiskey. And he had neither. He was a man in his late 20s, strong in the shoulders, quiet in his steps, with sun-darkened skin and earnest brown eyes. A rancher, but not one who had ever boasted or bragged. He didn't know how. His place sat far outside town, on land nobody cared to visit, and he spent most days alone with cattle and fences, mending what nature tried to break. It wasn't that he feared people. He just never fit among them. When he tied his horse by the general store, the laughter behind him rose again, louder. Someone called out, "Careful not to scare the ladies, now! Man like you, hell, you wouldn't know what to do if one smiled at you." Another chimed in, "Ain't no woman gonna waste a look on a man who's near 30 and still green as spring grass." He felt the burn in his cheeks, but he didn't lift his head. He stepped inside, bought flour, coffee, dried beans, and nails. The usual. The shopkeeper gave him a tight nod, pity, not kindness. It stung worse than the mockery outside. When he left the store, the jeers followed him like shadows. Someone mimicked a falsetto voice. "Oh, rancher, take me to your cabin!" Laughter exploded. He didn't break stride. He never did. The only strength he had left was refusing to let them see how deeply their ridicule cut. He mounted up, clicked his tongue, and let his mare carry him away from the cruelty of the street. The farther he rode, the quieter the world became. The town shrank behind him, its noise swallowed by vast grasslands. By the time he reached the familiar stretch of prairie leading to his small homestead, it felt like another universe. His cabin sat alone beneath a pair of cottonwoods, their leaves whispering secrets whenever the wind passed through. His cattle grazed peacefully nearby, unaware of human cruelties. Here, loneliness still existed, but it was honest. It didn't sneer, didn't mock. It simply sat beside him like an old companion he had grown used to. That evening he cooked beans over the fire, ate in silence, and watched the sky deepen from orange to purple. Coyotes howled in the distance. He leaned back in his chair, boots propped on a stump, and tried not to think about the mocking voices. But they clung to him like burrs. And yet, even with all that, he never hated them. He just wished someone, anyone, would see him without contempt. As night settled, he stared into the flames and wondered if life would always feel this way. If solitude was the only path meant for him. If whispers of his inexperience would haunt him forever. If there truly was nobody in this world who might look at him differently. He didn't know that somewhere, far beyond the ridge, fate was stirring. Days later, the world shifted. He woke at dawn, saddled his horse, and rode out to check the far end of his property. Summer had baked the land dry, and he needed to see if any fences had fallen in the night. The heat was already rising, turning the horizon into a blur. Hours passed quietly, until something unfamiliar broke the monotony. Smoke, thin, gray, curling upward from near the creek. Not the kind from a campfire. Darker. Wrong. His chest tightened. Out here, unexpected smoke usually meant trouble. He rode carefully toward the source, every sense alert. His hand hovered near the old revolver on his belt, not because he liked guns, but because a man alone had to carry one. As he reached the creek bed, the world fell unnervingly still. No birds chirped. No crickets sang. The only sound was the rush of water over stones. Then he saw it. A fallen horse, arrows jutting from its side. And beside it, slumped against a boulder, a woman. Not just any woman, an Apache woman, her long black hair tangled with dust and blood, her breathing shallow, her eyes half-lidded but watchful. A wound stained her side, dark and spreading. One hand clutched a knife, though her grip shook. The rancher froze. Her gaze snapped up to him, fierce despite her weakness. She didn't speak, but the blade's warning gleam told him enough. Come closer and risk your life. He lifted both hands slowly. I ain't here to harm you. Her jaw tightened, but her expression shifted. Curiosity or suspicion, he couldn't tell. He dismounted, moving slow as wet molasses. He reached for his canteen, uncapped it, and set it on a rock between them before stepping back. She hesitated, eyes locked on him, then on the water. Finally she drank short and desperate sips that betrayed just how close to collapse she was. Only when she finished did he inch closer. Her knife trembled, but she didn't lift it. He knelt, studying her wound with as much care as he could muster. Blood seeped through torn cloth, drying at the edges. Whoever attacked her had been relentless. You'll die out here, he murmured. Let me help. She didn't respond, but she didn't push him away either. That was permission enough. He tore strips from his own shirt, cleaned the wound as best he could, and bandaged her side. His hands shook, not from fear, but from the sudden ache in his chest. She wasn't just wounded. She was alone, stranded, hunted. Her eyes softened slightly as she watched him work. Not trusting yet, but no longer expecting harm. When he slipped his arm beneath her shoulders to lift her onto his horse, she tensed, gritting her teeth. I'm taking you to my place, he said gently. Ain't much, but it's safe. She stared at him with a mix of exhaustion and bewilderment. As if she couldn't understand why a stranger, worse, a white rancher, would help her at all. He didn't wait for approval. She needed saving, and he wouldn't let her die out here. He mounted behind her, steadying her with an arm around her waist. Her breath itched at the pain, and she leaned back slightly against him, too weak to resist. For a man who'd spent years being mocked for his solitude, her warmth against his chest felt unreal. Not intimate, just human, something he hadn't felt in too long. The ride back was slow, each step jostling her wound. She didn't speak a word. But she didn't pull away from him either. By the time the cabin came into view, her eyes were drifting shut. He carried her inside, setting her gently on his bed. She clutched her knife weakly, more instinct than threat. He boiled water. Crushed herbs he knew helped slow bleeding. Cleaned her wound again. She watched him the whole time, breathing heavily, her gaze sharp even through her pain. Hours passed. The sun sank. The world grew dim. And at some point, he couldn't say when exactly, her expression changed. Curiosity replaced suspicion. Then something quieter, something he couldn't name. As the fire crackled and her breathing steadied, she whispered something in Apache, soft and unsure. He didn't understand the words, but the tone was unmistakable. Gratitude. He nodded once, not trusting his voice. And in that small cabin, under that soft flicker of firelight, something subtle shifted between them. Not trust, not yet. But a thread, fragile and undeniable, had formed. In the days that followed, that thread pulled tighter. She slept most of the first day. When she woke, he offered broth. She refused at first, chin lifted stubbornly. But hunger won, and she accepted the bowl, watching him with those hawk-sharp eyes as she drank. Every movement he made, she studied. Not judging. Assessing. When she could sit upright without gasping, she finally spoke English. Why help? Her voice was raspy from thirst but strong underneath. He shrugged, embarrassed by the question. 'Cause you needed it. No other reason? No other reason. She looked away, as if the simplicity of his answer unsettled her. She told him her name. He told her his. She didn't laugh at it, or at him. She just nodded. At night she slept lightly, waking at the smallest sound. Old instincts, he figured. But when he brought her water or checked her bandages, she didn't flinch like she had before. On the third day she was able to stand. He steadied her, she allowed it. Her hand gripped his arm, firm and warm, and he felt something deep in his chest shift again, something he tried to ignore. They walked the ridge together, slowly. The wind tugged at her hair, and she stood tall despite the pain. She looked at his ranch, his fences, his cattle scattered across the plain. "You live alone?" she observed. He nodded. "Why?" He hesitated. The truth sat heavy in his throat. But lies had never suited him. "Folks in town don't think highly of me." She tilted her head. "Why?" He swallowed. "I ain't experienced. Not the way men brag about. Never been with a woman." She stared at him, not mocking, not disbelieving. Just listening. He expected laughter. Teasing. Scorn. Instead, she said quietly but firmly, "A man's worth is not in what he has taken. It is in what he gives." He blinked, stunned. She held his gaze, eyes dark and steady. "A heart untouched is not weakness. It is rare." No one had ever said anything like that to him. Ever. He didn't know how to respond. He looked away, face burning, and she watched him with something like respect. Respect. For him. It didn't feel real. When they returned to the cabin, she sat by the fire while he chopped wood. She watched him with a strange expression, guarded yet thoughtful. As if reassessing everything she thought she knew of men. And as the days passed, the distance between them lessened. Slowly. Naturally. She asked about his life on the ranch. He asked about her people, not out of curiosity for stories, but to understand her. Her answers were sparse at first, but grew longer as trust took root. Yet he never pushed. He was patient. Always patient. And she noticed. One night, when the fire glowed low, she spoke of the attack, of the men who had hunted her, of the tribes scattered across the plains. Her voice carried pain and anger, but also resilience. She spoke of the land, of honor, of loyalty. He sat across from her, listening as if memorizing every word. When she finished, she expected judgment or pity. She received neither. Instead, he said softly, "I'm sorry you went through that." Not dramatic. Not performative. Just sincere. And something inside her eased, like a knot loosening for the first time in years. She smiled, a small, genuine smile that lit her whole face. He felt the warmth of it like a sunrise. It struck him so deeply he had to look away. And in that moment, in that tiny cabin in the middle of an unforgiving land, a bond began to form, quiet, steady, and unlike anything either had known. The following days stitched themselves into a quiet rhythm neither of them expected. Dawn crept in with golden light spilling through the single window, touching the wooden floorboards and the wool blanket she rested under. He rose early, always careful not to make noise, tending the fire and preparing whatever simple breakfast he could offer, eggs when the hens cooperated, biscuits when the flour allowed, or just coffee strong enough to wake the dead. He didn't wake her. She rose when she could, leaning against the wall for balance, her steps still stiff from the wound. At first she refused his arm. But after nearly collapsing on the third morning, she accepted it, reluctantly, but without pride clouding her judgment. His steady hand on her elbow seemed to surprise them both. They spent mornings outside whenever her strength allowed. The summer wind blew warm across the plains, carrying dust and the distant smell of cattle. She stood at the cabin's edge, wrapped in one of his old coats, her dark eyes scanning the horizon as if expecting storms or enemies to rise out of it. Old habits. Old scars. He didn't pry. He repaired fences and checked the herd while she watched, studying every movement. It wasn't idle curiosity. She was measuring him the same way she measured the land, practical, observant, quietly discerning the kind of man he was beneath the surface. Once, as he hammered a stubborn nail into a fence post, she asked, "Why do you not fight back?" He paused mid-swing. "Against who?" "The men in town." The question was simple, but the weight of it pressed hard on his chest. He shrugged. "Fight and won't change their minds. Might even prove them right in some ways." She frowned faintly. "When someone mocks you, they test your strength. If you show none, they think they are right. He rested the hammer on his thigh, thinking. Maybe. But I ain't looking to prove myself to them. Don't want trouble. Don't want blood. Yet you help strangers, she said softly. Even when they carry knives. He smiled faintly, meeting her gaze. Not all trouble's worth in a way. She held his eyes for a long breath, something unspoken flickering there. Respect, again, deeper this time, almost tender before she blinked it away. She began to help him in small ways as she healed. Sweeping the cabin floor in slow strokes. Sorting herbs she'd gathered in her travels, explaining which eased pain and which soothed fever. Her voice grew stronger each day, her posture straighter, her spirit returning like a flame rekindled. At night, they shared the silence of the cabin. He cooked dinner, always apologizing for the simplicity, always embarrassed by the blandness. She never complained. She ate with the calm grace of someone who knew hunger intimately, and appreciated even the humblest meal. Sometimes she told stories, short, quiet tales of her people, of the spirits they honored, of the land that shaped them. Her voice was low, musical in a way he couldn't describe, woven with strength and sorrow. He listened with a reverence that surprised even him. No one had ever shared stories with him before. No one had trusted him with pieces of their life. On the 7th evening she was strong enough to walk to the ridge again. They stood atop it, the prairie stretching endless in every direction, bathed in the red glow of sunset. The sky burned like a dying fire. She wrapped her arms lightly around herself, breathing in the warm wind. Your land is quiet, she said. He nodded. Quiet's all I've ever known. It is not a bad thing. Most folks think it is. Most folk do not understand peace, she answered. They fear it. They do not know what to do when there is no noise to hide behind. He turned to her. And you? You seem to handle silence just fine. She allowed a tiny smile. I learned to. Silence is where truth lives. He swallowed, unsure why her words struck him so deeply. She pointed toward the distant hills. My people rode there long ago. We followed the buffalo. My father taught me to track them, to listen to the earth. Her eyes clouded with memory. But the world has changed. The buffalo are near gone. The cavalry hunts us for breathing. She paused, voice firming. I do not know if my people will survive this world. He wanted to say something, but the words tangled in his throat. Nothing he could offer felt worthy of such pain. So he said the one thing that was true. You survived. She looked at him then, fully, openly, a depth behind her gaze that unsettled him. Because you helped me, she said. Do not pretend it was nothing. He shook his head. Anyone would have done the same. She stepped closer, her expression turning sharp. No, she said plainly. Not anyone. He couldn't hold her gaze. It was too intense. Too honest. When they returned to the cabin, she paused at the threshold, her fingers brushing the wood as though memorizing its feel. This place, she murmured, it is safe. He blinked. Never heard anyone describe my cabin like that. It is safe, she repeated. Because of you. His breath hitched. Her words carved deeper than she knew. In town, word was spreading. A ranch hand passing through the plains had caught sight of the rancher walking beside an Apache woman. The news traveled fast, faster than wildfire in a dry field. Men gathered in the saloon, exchanging confused whispers, scoffing, speculating, fueling their own disbelief. Her? With him? What in God's name could she see in that man? He feed her something? Trick her somehow? He couldn't charm a damn broom. What's she doing with him? The bartender spit into a bucket. Maybe she got hit on the head. Laughter erupted. But beneath the laughter grew something uglier, jealousy, frustration, wounded pride. The men who mocked him felt the sting of something they couldn't name. It didn't matter that they'd never wanted her, never known her. What mattered was that the man they'd labeled a coward, a nobody, now walked beside someone fierce, proud, and beautiful. A tension took root in town, brittle as a dry twig waiting to snap. Back at the ranch, life continued quietly. On the 10th morning, she rose before him. He found her outside, moving slowly but with purpose, practicing with her knife, short, sharp motions, surprisingly graceful. The blade flashed in the sun, slicing through the air with precision. She grimaced at the pull in her side, but didn't stop. He stepped toward her. You shouldn't push yourself that hard. She didn't lower the blade. Healing requires strength. Healing also requires not tearing open stitches. She paused, eyeing him. Stitches? You didn't think that wound closed itself, did ya? He said with a sheepish smile. She blinked, then shook her head, almost amused. You speak plain. Always have. Most men speak in circles. You don't. Never learned how. She sheathed the knife. Good, she said. Circles waste time. He chuckled, rubbing the back of his neck. Glad my shortcomings are finally worth something. She stepped closer, studying him. They are not shortcomings. Her gaze lingered on him longer than before. Something in it warmed him straight to the core. That afternoon he saddled 2 horses, his mare, and another he rarely used, a skittish bay that didn't take kindly to strangers. He expected trouble, but when she approached, the horse sniffed her hand and calmed instantly, as though sensing something familiar in her presence. You got away with animals, he said. She stroked the horse's neck. Animals do not lie. They show what they feel. She met his eyes. I trust them more than people. He nodded. He understood that more than she knew. They rode across the prairie together, her posture still stiff, but her spirit alive. She pointed out tracks he had never noticed, deer crossing, wolf prints, a rattlesnake trail winding through the dust. She showed him how to read broken blades of grass, how to sense the weight of the wind. He listened to every word. As the sun reached its peak overhead, they stopped at a stream shaded by cottonwoods. The water sparkled cool and inviting. She knelt by the bank, cupping water in her hands, letting it run through her fingers like liquid glass. He watched her with quiet awe, the way she moved, the way she breathed, the way she seemed part of the land itself. She caught him staring and raised an eyebrow. What? He looked away quickly. Nothing. Just making sure you're okay. Her lips curved into the faintest smile. I am. They stayed a long while, listening to the creek's soft murmur. For the first time since he found her, the world around them felt peaceful, not cautious, not tense. Just peaceful. But peace never lasted in this land. It was late afternoon when he noticed riders approaching from the east, 3 silhouettes against the blazing horizon. He tensed immediately. We should head back. She followed his gaze, her expression sharpening. You know them? No. And I don't aim to. They mounted quickly, heading toward the ranch with urgency. Either spoke aloud. The riders didn't follow at first, but their presence on the horizon lingered in his mind like a thorn. Back at the cabin, she watched him pace, hands gripping his hat. You are worried. A bit. 3 men cannot take this place. It ain't the place I'm worried about. Her eyes softened. You are worried for me. He didn't answer. He didn't need to. She stepped closer, placing a hand lightly on his arm. I am not weak. And I am not alone. The gesture was small. But to him, it felt monumental. That night dinner was quieter than usual. The glow from the fire cast warm highlights on her face, her hair loose around her shoulders. She watched the flames with a distant expression, thinking deeply. He cleared his throat. If you want, you can stay here as long as you need. Ain't no rush to move on. She turned toward him slowly. Why do you offer this? He hesitated. Because I want you to be safe. Because it feels right. Because. He swallowed hard. Because it's nice having someone around. Her expression softened in a way he hadn't seen before. It is nice, she whispered, to not be alone. Their eyes held each other's for a long moment, warm, quiet, fragile. Then a knock shattered it. Not a gentle knock. A pounding one. His heart jumped into his throat. She rose instantly, her hand finding the knife at her waist. He opened the door a crack. 3 men stood outside. Town men. The same voices that once mocked him now stared at him with a mix of disbelief, anger, and something more dangerous, entitlement. "You got company, rancher?" one sneered. He stepped out onto the porch, blocking the doorway. "State your business." The tallest man spat tobacco onto the dirt. "Heard rumors you're shacking up with a little Apache gal. Thought we'd see for ourselves." His blood went cold. "That ain't your concern," he said tightly. The men exchanged looks, grinning. "Oh, ain't it? See, boys like you don't get women like her. World got rules." Behind him, he heard her move silently. "Ready. Go home," he said. "Ain't nothin' for you here." One of them laughed. "Oh, there's somethin' here all right." The mood turned lethal. She stepped beside him before he could stop her, eyes blazing, posture proud and fearless. The men flinched back instinctively. He felt something ignite inside him, protectiveness, fury, courage he never knew he possessed. "That's enough," he growled. The tallest man squared his shoulders. "Or what?" He didn't have an answer. But she did. Her knife was at the man's throat before any of them blinked. She moved like lightning, swift, precise, deadly. The other 2 stumbled back. Her voice was fire itself. "Leave." The man trembled beneath the blade. "Now." They scrambled away, climbing onto their horses and riding off into the darkness, cursing but terrified. When silence fell again, she lowered the knife slowly, her chest heaving. He stared at her in awe and fear and something far deeper. "You didn't have to." "Yes," she cut in. "I did." She held his gaze, fierce and unwavering. "No one will take what they have no right to." The air crackled between them. Heat. Fear. Relief. Understanding. Something was changing. Something neither could deny. The sun dipped lower as the Cowboy and the Apache girl rode through the narrowing canyons, their horses' hooves echoing against the stone walls. The heat of the day still clung stubbornly to the air, turning every breath warm, thick, and almost sweet with dust and sun-baked earth. He hadn't meant to stare at her, not the way he had been doing all afternoon, but there was something in her ease atop the horse, the calm of her posture, her silent confidence that made it impossible not to look. He wasn't used to riding beside someone who didn't make him feel small. With the cowhands back at camp, he had always been the clumsy one, the one who lagged behind, the one who dropped his rope or let the cattle drift right through his fingers. He'd heard the snickers behind his back, the comments about how a man his age should have already proven himself, already taken a woman to bed, already carved a name into the world. But here, with her, he didn't feel half-formed. He didn't feel unfinished. He felt like maybe there was more to him than the mistakes people remembered. "Your horse," she said suddenly, her voice cutting clean through the quiet. "He listens to you better today." He blinked, almost missing the compliment. "Oh? I reckon I've been trying not to tug his reins too hard." "He notices," she replied simply. He didn't know what to say to that. No one ever told him he was doing well. Nobody ever praised him unless it came with laughter stuck to the tail end of it. But she said it like fact, not flattery. Like an observation, not a kindness. Somehow that made it matter more. They rode on, the canyon spreading wider, opening into a stretch of rolling land dotted with sagebrush and broken boulders. The evening wind moved differently out here, cooler, smoother, brushing past them like the slow exhale of the desert. The cowboy took off his hat, wiped the sweat from his brow, and hoped she couldn't see how hard his heart was beating. He'd been nervous all day, and he didn't want her to notice, though he suspected she already had. She seemed like the type who saw more than she spoke. Ahead, the trail sloped down to a patch of hard-packed dirt where two small streams met, carving a clean line between the rocks. She brought her horse to a stop and looked over at him. "Water," she said. He nodded. "Yeah. Good spot to rest em." They dismounted, and for a moment he fumbled with his stirrup, nearly missing his step as he came down. She glanced at him with a faint, Unreadable expression, not judgment, not amusement, just watching. Observing. The way someone might observe a horse learning a new gait. The cowboy felt that familiar heat crawl up his neck. He braced himself for the ridicule that always followed his slips. But none came. She just stepped past him, crouched by the stream, and began filling her hands with cool water. He let out a shaky breath he didn't realize he'd been holding and joined her by the edge. The water was clear enough to see the stones underneath, all smooth and worn down by decades of flow. He cupped his hands and drank, forcing himself not to look at her too much. But he could feel her presence beside him, quiet, grounded, self-assured. "Earlier," she said suddenly, her voice low, "when the men laughed at you." His chest tightened. He stared down at the water. "Yeah. I reckon they get their kicks that way. You did not look at them. You did not speak back." He shrugged. "Ain't got much to say when folks already made up their minds?" She considered that for a long moment. The air between them shifted, subtle but palpable, like a breeze gliding between two passing horses. "In my tribe," she said, "we believe a man who speaks only when he must is a man who listens. A man who watches. A man who learns." He looked at her then. Really looked. The fading light painted the side of her face in soft gold, catching the small braids woven into her dark hair. Her eyes, sharp, warm, steady, held his, and for once he didn't feel like looking away. "You think I'm that kind of man?" he asked, barely above a whisper. She didn't blink. "I think you could be." The words hit him deeper than he expected. They carried weight, not hope, but possibility. A possibility no one had ever offered him before. He sat back on the grass, elbows on his knees, and let the desert quiet settle around them. "Truth is," he admitted softly, "I ain't ever been real good at knowing what I'm supposed to be." She tilted her head. "You are not meant to be something decided by others." He almost smiled. "Almost. Feels like everybody round me got a say in it anyway." "Then stop listening to them." He gave a short breath, half laugh, half sigh. "Easier said than done?" She dipped her fingers into the stream again, letting the water trail between them like silver threads. "Hard paths are worth walking. Easy ones lead nowhere." He thought about that. Really thought about it. No one talked to him like that. No one treated him like a man with choices, with direction, with the ability to decide his own worth. "You talk like you know something about hard paths," he said. She didn't answer for a moment. Then, "I do." The way she said it made him realize her life hadn't been simple either. He didn't know her story yet, but he wanted to, not out of curiosity, but out of something deeper. Something steady and slow-growing, like a campfire catching against kindling. He stood, brushing the dust off his trousers. "We'd better keep movin'. Night'll fall quick." She mounted her horse in one smooth, practiced motion. He swung onto his own, clumsier but managing. As they started forward, the sky began shifting into hues of purple and pale orange. The shapes of distant hills rose like old silhouettes watching over them. For a long time, neither spoke. But it wasn't awkward. It was quiet in a way that felt shared. The cowboy glanced at her again, just briefly, and thought about how strange it was to feel understood by someone he barely knew. Strange, but not unwelcome. He didn't expect the night to bring trouble. He didn't expect to have to prove himself sooner than he ever imagined. And he didn't expect that she, of all people, would be the one standing beside him when the storm came. But the desert had a way of changing a man fast. And the summer wasn't finished with them yet. The wind carried a hint of something different as they rode, an unease he couldn't quite name at first. Maybe it was the quiet, too quiet even for the open desert. Maybe it was the way her horse lifted its head more often than before, ears twitching, nostrils flaring at scents he couldn't detect. Or maybe it was simply the fact that trouble had a habit of finding him even when he wanted nothing more than to stay small, unnoticed, unimportant. They crested a rise, the land flattening out into a dry basin ringed with jagged rocks. The sun had nearly fallen behind the hills, turning the sky into a blood-red smear that made every shadow look like it had teeth. She slowed her horse and lifted her chin slightly, scanning the land ahead. "There," she murmured. He followed her gaze. At first, he saw nothing. But then the shapes materialized, 3 horses tied loosely near a cluster of boulders, saddles still on, stirrups dangling. No riders in sight. His stomach tightened. "You think they left em there on purpose?" "Maybe." He swallowed. "Maybe who?" She didn't answer, but she didn't need to. There were only a few kinds of men who would abandon their mounts in the open like that, and none of them were good news. The cowboy shifted in his saddle. "We should go around." She didn't move. "If they are hiding, going around will not matter. They will see us. They chose this place because it gives them cover." He hated that she was right. He hated even more the idea of danger settling over her like a shadow. But he rode forward anyway, because turning back would make him look weak, and he'd had enough of that for a lifetime. As they approached, a sharp whistle cut through the air. The cowboy froze. A figure stepped out from behind the rocks, rifle slung casually over one shoulder, face hidden beneath the brim of a dusty hat. Another emerged to the left, revolver already drawn. A third dropped down from a ledge above, boots scraping against stone. They had been surrounded long before he noticed. "Well now," the one with the rifle drawled. "Ain't this something? Didn't expect company tonight." The cowboy straightened in his saddle, though his hands felt stiff and uncertain. "We ain't lookin' for trouble." "Funny thing," the man said. "Trouble don't care what you're lookin' for." The second outlaw, a lanky man with a stained vest, pointed his revolver toward the Apache girl. "That's a fine horse you got there, miss." "Real fine." She didn't react. Didn't flinch. Didn't speak. The cowboy did. "Leave her be." It came out quicker than he intended, sharper, more forceful. For a split second, even he was surprised by the steadiness of his voice. The outlaw turned his attention to him, raising an eyebrow. "Well now," he sneered, "we got ourselves a brave one." The cowboy wasn't brave. Not really. He knew that. But something inside him pushed up through the fear, the memory of her words by the stream, the way she looked at him like he could be someone worth something. He wasn't about to prove her wrong. "We're just passing through," he said. "Ain't no need for trouble." The outlaw snorted. "There's always need when a man's hungry enough." The girl spoke then, calm and even. "We have nothing worth taking." "Oh, I wouldn't say that," the outlaw said, eyes flicking over her with clear intent. The cowboy's jaw clenched so hard it hurt. He felt the heat of anger rise, real anger, the kind that didn't bother to ask permission. "You ain't touching her." The man with the rifle chuckled, a low, ugly sound. "Look at that. Boy thinks he's a hero. Boy. Always boy. Never man." His fingers hovered near his holster, though he'd never been fast, never been good with a gun. But he didn't care. Not now. He wasn't about to let them take her. The air tightened between them like a pulled rope. Then a sharp crack shattered the moment. Not a gunshot, a stone, thrown with precision. It struck the revolver wielder's hand, knocking the weapon clean from his grip. He yelped, stumbling back, clutching his wrist. Before he could recover, she had already leapt from her horse, moved like a shadow, and kicked his legs out from under him. The cowboy blinked, stunned at her speed. The third outlaw reached for his gun. The cowboy didn't think, he reacted. His hand shot for his holster, fumbling, nearly dropping the revolver. He fired anyway. The bullet slammed into the dirt inches from the man's boot, but the shock of it made the outlaw hesitate long enough for her to grab the fallen revolver and point it directly at him. Everything froze. The man with the rifle took half a step back, maybe weighing whether any of this was worth dying for. It wasn't. "All right," he growled, raising his hands. "Easy. We're done here." She didn't lower the gun. The cowboy found himself breathing hard, chest burning from adrenaline he wasn't used to. "Get your horses," she said coldly. "Go." The outlaws scrambled, gathering their mounts, riding off with curses thrown over their shoulders. The basin grew quiet again, too quiet, the kind of quiet that fills the space right after danger slips away. She finally lowered the weapon. The cowboy slid off his horse, legs unsteady. "You all right?" "Yes," she said simply. Then she looked at him, really looked, her eyes slowly softening from the intensity of the moment. "You were not afraid for yourself." He blew out a breath. "I was afraid. But not for the reasons you think." She took a step toward him, dust swirling around her ankles. "You stood between me and danger." He shrugged, but it wasn't dismissive. More like he didn't know what to do with the truth. "Weren't gonna let 'em hurt you." A silence stretched between them, not empty, but heavy with something unspoken. "You did well," she said quietly. The words hit him harder than the danger had. He looked away, feeling the flush rise up his neck again. "I ain't used to hearin' that." "You should get used to it." He didn't have an answer to that. They remounted, riding on as the night settled over the land fully. The darkness felt different now, less like a threat and more like a blanket pulled over two people sharing the same path. After a long stretch of quiet, she spoke again. "You risked your life for me." He swallowed. "Felt like the right thing to do. Not all men choose what is right." He hesitated, then said softly, "Maybe I finally found something worth choosin' right for." If she heard the weight behind his words, she didn't show it. But he saw the faintest curve touch the edge of her mouth, small, subtle, but real. They rode into the night, neither knowing where the trail would lead, but both feeling, quietly, deeply, that something had changed between them. Something neither of them was ready to name. The night deepened as they rode, the sky stretching wide and endless above them, scattered with stars sharp enough to cut the dark. The air turned cooler, brushing along their skin, carrying scents of sagebrush and distant rain. Their horses walked at an easy pace, hoofs thudding softly over the packed dirt trail. Danger had passed, but its echo lingered in the cowboy's bones like a fading tremor. Every few seconds he glanced over at her, half to make sure she was really unharmed, half because he couldn't stop himself. She rode straight back, steady, eyes forward. But he noticed something small, almost hidden. Her fingers were trembling slightly on the reins. Not from fear. No, more like anger that she'd even needed that brief help from him. Anger that the world forced either of them into moments that tested life so cruelly. "You're sure you ain't hurt?" he asked quietly. She exhaled slowly. "I am sure. You were something back there. I ain't never seen anyone move that fast. I have been hunted before," she said. "You learn." He didn't know how to respond to that. A truth like that didn't call for comfort. It called for respect. So he just nodded, letting the silence settle again. They rode until the moon rose high enough to paint the land in pale silver. A stream curved across the trail, its water faintly gleaming. She slowed her horse. "We stop here," she said. He followed her lead, sliding off his mount. His legs felt stiff with leftover adrenaline, and when he bent to tie the reins to a low branch, he realized his hands were still shaking too. She noticed. Of course she did. "You are not used to fighting," she said softly. "No," he admitted. "I ain't." "You still did." He looked up at her, meeting her gaze across the water. "Couldn't just stand there." She stepped closer, the moonlight catching on the strands of her dark hair. The wind lifted a few loose pieces, brushing them across her cheek. "You act like it was nothing," she said. "But you could have died." He swallowed. "I ain't dead. That is not the point." "Well," he said, scratching the back of his neck, "maybe I ain't real good at making points." She stared at him another long moment, then let out a breath, half frustration, half something tender he couldn't fully read. "Come," she said. "We will rest." They set up a small fire pit beside the stream. He gathered dry branches while she arranged stones in a neat circle. He struck a flint, coaxing a flame from sparks until the fire warmed open space with its flickering glow. They sat on opposite sides of it at first, both tired, both silent. He watched her in the firelight. The heat danced across her features, strong cheekbones, dark eyes reflecting flame, hair braided loosely over her shoulder with dust caught between the strands. She carried herself with a pride untouched by fear, a quiet strength forged from scars she didn't show. And she was beautiful. He felt the thought hit him like a confession, though he said nothing. His chest tightened with the weight of it, as if beauty was something dangerous to name out loud. She opened her water pouch and took a slow drink, then handed it to him without looking. He froze for a moment. Small gestures like that always caught him off guard. No one had ever offered him anything without expecting something back. He took it carefully, as though it were something fragile. "Thank you." They sat for a long while, the fire crackling, the stream whispering nearby. Every now and then the night called out with a coyote's distant cry. "Do you believe," she said suddenly, voice low, "that some people are meant to cross paths for a reason?" He blinked. "You mean like fate? In my people's stories, the world is full of threads. Some cross only for a moment. Others tie together for life. Sometimes you don't know which kind you've found." He stared into the fire, watching the sparks drift upward. "Never much figured I was someone fate would pay mind to. You think too little of yourself." He shook his head. "Ain't that just? I spent most of my life being the one other folks stepped around. Like a rock in the trail, there, but not worth looking at." She leaned slightly toward him. The fire softened the hard lines of her face. "You see a rock," she said quietly. "But I saw a man who carried me to safety when he could have left me. A man who listens more than he speaks. A man with hands that shake, but still reach for what is right." He felt the words settle on him like a blanket he wasn't used to wearing. They warmed and unsettled him all at once. "I don't know what you think I am," he said softly, "but I ain't special." "No," she said firmly. "You are simply unrecognized." His breath caught slightly. They sat in that long, fragile quiet. It wasn't awkward. It wasn't empty. It was something else, something that swelled between them like the slow rising of dawn. She shifted to sit closer to the fire, and when she did, her knee brushed his. He froze. So did she. She didn't move away. "Do I make you uneasy?" she asked, voice hardly more than a murmur. He hesitated. "No. Just, I ain't used to being near someone like you." "Someone like me? Somebody who don't look at me like a joke." Her eyes softened, shadows flickering across her face. "Then look at me." He turned his head, meeting her gaze. Her eyes were deep, dark, steady, like standing in warm soil after rain. She didn't look away. "You saved me today," she said quietly. "You could have died. And that means something to me." He swallowed. "Would have done it again." Her lips parted just slightly, like the beginnings of a question she didn't speak. She shifted even closer, their shoulders nearly touching now. The fire threw warmth across their skin, but it wasn't the fire that made his pulse thrum. She reached out, not touching him, but close, so close he felt the faint warmth of her fingertips near his cheek. She paused, watching him, searching for any sign of fear or hesitation. All she saw was awe. Her fingers brushed his jaw, light as a drifting leaf. He didn't move. Couldn't. "You are gentle," she whispered. He exhaled shakily. "Ain't nobody ever said that like it mattered." "It matters to me." He felt something crack open in his chest, something quiet and long buried. But before anything else could happen, she pulled her hand back, the shift so subtle yet so sudden it almost hurt. "We should rest," she said softly. He nodded, though part of him wanted to reach out, to hold the moment before it slipped away. They lay down on opposite sides of the fire, the heat pulsing between them. He stared up at the stars, unable to sleep, heart pounding with every memory of her touch. She spoke once more, voice carried by the calm night breeze. "You did not tremble because of them," she said. "You trembled because of me." He didn't answer. He didn't need to. The truth filled the silence. Morning came slow and pale over the prairie, a soft wash of gold and gray that painted every ridge and tuft of grass. The cowboy woke first, as usual, listening to the gentle shift of her breathing nearby. She lay on her side, knees slightly drawn, hair tangled across her face, dust caught in the loose strands. The fire had burned low during the night, leaving only smoldering embers that glowed faintly in the pre-dawn light. He rose quietly, careful not to disturb her. His back ached from sleeping on the hard ground, but he felt no real discomfort, not compared to the ache that had lived in him for years, the one born from loneliness and mockery. That ache had softened, replaced by a warmth he barely dared to name. The small fire he rekindled sputtered to life, and he boiled water for coffee, fumbling with the metal cup in hands still stiff with cold. She stirred at the smell, blinking sleep from her dark eyes, and he caught the briefest flash of a smile as she sat up, brushing herself off with hands that looked delicate and strong all at once. "Coffee?" he offered. She nodded. "Yes." He handed it to her, and she held the cup with both hands, taking a slow sip, her gaze sweeping the horizon. "The night is calm," she said softly. "No men following." He shook his head. "I don't reckon they will come back." She looked at him, her expression sharp and discerning. "You never know. Some men will risk the dark just to prove themselves." "Maybe," he admitted, "but they don't know what they're up against." Her eyes softened slightly. "No," she said. "They do not." They sat together in companionable silence, letting the light strengthen and the birds awaken around them. The prairie stretched endlessly in every direction, pale gold turning to amber as the sun climbed, the hills rolling away like waves frozen in time. It was beautiful. And yet, he couldn't help but feel a tug of unease, the echo of the previous night's dangers still fresh in his mind. She seemed to sense it. "You worry too much," she said quietly, more to herself than to him. "You carry the past like a pack that does not belong to you." "I got reason," he said. "Can't help it." "Then let it go," she urged. "You do not fight with ghosts." He stared at her, wishing he could. Wishing it were that simple. The morning passed slowly as they prepared to move. She helped him pack lightly, securing the few belongings they carried, her movements careful but efficient. He noticed the precision in everything she did, the quiet competence that came from years of survival. It impressed him, though he would never admit it aloud. They mounted their horses and set off, following a narrow trail along the ridge that overlooked a canyon below. The wind blew warm and dry, lifting dust and carrying the scent of sage. For hours they rode, either speaking much, letting the horses set a steady pace. The cowboy stole glances at her from time to time, marveling at the way she rode with effortless grace, hair catching the sunlight, eyes alert and sharp yet calm. At midday they stopped at a small grove of cottonwoods beside a creek, the only shade for miles. She dismounted gracefully, her horse following her lead without need of reins. He watched her, heart hammering as she knelt to draw water, filling her canteen with the stream's cool flow. The sunlight caught her features, illuminating her dark skin and the smooth curve of her cheek. He felt himself drawn toward her, a warmth rising that had nothing to do with the sun. "You seem at home here," he said softly. "I am," she replied, eyes fixed on the water. "The land is honest. It tells the truth if you listen." He nodded slowly. I reckon you're right." They rested in silence, letting the horses graze. He found himself yearning for more than this quiet companionship, longing for a hand to hold, a voice to speak to him without judgment, a presence to make the endless prairie feel smaller and safe. He'd never allowed himself such thoughts before. He'd spent too long hiding, too long letting the world mock him for being quiet, for being untested, for being a boy in a man's land, as they said. Now, with her near, he wondered if perhaps he had been wrong all along about what mattered. Perhaps strength wasn't in boasting, in conquests, in rough talk at the saloon. Perhaps strength was measured in patience, in kindness, in the quiet courage to stand for what was right. Her voice broke the thought. "You are thinking too much." "I can't help it," he admitted. "Thinking does not change the past. Only what you do now matters." He considered that as he watched the creek flow, her profile outlined by the bright sun and shaded trees. Something inside him shifted, a fragile but undeniable stirring. They rode again in the afternoon, following the creek toward the south. The terrain became rougher, rocky, uneven. She guided her horse with sure hands, motioning for him to follow her lead. A rattlesnake crossed their path, coiling instantly at the sound of hoofs. He froze, ready to draw his gun. But she leaned down, whispering a single word to the creature, and it uncoiled, retreating silently into the rocks. He blinked. You did that?" She shrugged. "Some things are frightened. Some things are not. You must know the difference." He swallowed, realizing he had never truly seen her like this, commanding respect not by force, but by presence. As evening approached, they climbed a hill that overlooked a wide valley. The sun sank low, painting the sky in strokes of red and purple. They stopped, dismounting together, the horses grazing nearby. "I could stay here forever," she murmured, looking out over the expanse. He leaned against a boulder, breathing in the warmth of her words, the closeness, the quiet understanding between them. "Maybe forever's not so bad," he said softly. She glanced at him, eyes meeting his, dark and unreadable. "Not so bad?" she repeated. "Do you know what that means?" He shook his head. "Not really. It means that perhaps for once, you have found a place where you belong. And perhaps, someone to share it with." He felt his heart hammer. He wanted to speak, to tell her everything he had felt for years, everything he had feared to admit. But the words caught in his throat. She reached for his hand. Lightly. Tentatively. But enough to send warmth straight to his chest. "Do you feel it too?" she asked. He nodded slowly, barely moving his hand to meet hers. The contact was electric in its simplicity, grounding him and unbalancing him all at once. "I do," he whispered. They stayed that way, hands brushing, hearts racing, watching the sun dip behind the horizon. The night promised a stillness that felt safer than anything he had known, a quiet that was theirs alone. And for the first time in years, he felt something he hadn't allowed himself to hope for, belonging, and the stirring of something deeper than friendship, something fierce, something tender, something that could not be denied. Night fell fully over the valley, draping the prairie in deep indigo. Stars gleamed like distant fires, scattered across the sky, and the moon rose pale, casting silver light over the rolling hills. They had made camp near a small clump of rocks that provided windbreak and shelter. The horses grazed quietly, and for a long while, the Cowboy and the Apache girl simply sat side by side, watching the night. He felt the weight of the day's events press upon him, the outlaws, the threat, the fear, but somehow, with her near, it felt lighter, manageable. He wasn't alone. For the first time, he had someone who could see him, not mock him, not measure him against the shallow standards of the saloon crowd. Someone who knew what courage could be, even in quiet, and someone who understood patience, resilience, and heart. She looked at him then, eyes reflecting the firelight. "Do you know," she said softly, "why some men never find someone to share their lives with?" He shook his head. "Guess I ain't never thought about it much. They look too hard in the wrong places. Or they think they must change who they are to be worthy." He swallowed. "Guess I done that a bit myself." "No," she said firmly. "You have only learned the ways of others. That is not weakness. That is survival." He felt something lift in him, a weight he hadn't realized he'd carried so long. "Survival," he repeated. "Seems like a simple word for something heavy." "Sometimes the heaviest things are the simplest," she replied. Her voice held a weight, too, one that spoke of nights spent in danger, of choices made alone, of the path of living carefully but freely. They ate a meager supper of dried meat and biscuits, sharing what they had brought, but it wasn't the food that filled him. It was the quiet companionship, the ease of sitting with someone who understood without demanding explanation. He stole glances at her as she worked, brushing crumbs from her lap, hair falling in soft waves across her cheek. The firelight traced her features, showing strength and grace he had never seen before. After the meal, she lay back on a blanket he had spread, arms crossed behind her head. He hesitated, then joined her, lying nearby but not too close. The night was theirs, full of wind and stars and soft sounds of the valley settling into sleep. I could stay like this forever, he murmured. She didn't answer immediately, just turned her gaze toward the sky. Some moments, she said finally, are meant to be felt, not spoken. He nodded slowly, feeling the truth of it. Words often failed him, and with her, they felt unnecessary. There was a language in shared glances, in small touches, in presence alone that spoke louder than anything he could say. A sudden rustle in the bushes made him tense. He reached for his gun instinctively, but she put a hand on his arm, steadying him. It is only the wind, she said calmly. He exhaled, letting the tension drain. She was right. She always seemed to see what he could not. They lay back again, side by side, the distance between them small but growing smaller with each passing hour. He felt the courage he never had before, courage born not from bravado, but from connection. From the knowledge that he was not alone. That he was seen. That he mattered. She shifted slightly closer, brushing her hand against his. He didn't pull away. Instead, he let the warmth settle, felt his pulse quicken in a way that scared and thrilled him all at once. He had never touched a woman this way before, never allowed himself such intimacy. Yet it felt right. Natural. The world beyond the fire, beyond the valley, beyond the mocking townsfolk, fell away entirely. You are not afraid, she said softly. He shook his head. Afraid? Maybe. But not now. Not here. You could have been, she whispered. The outlaws, the land, it can be cruel. I reckon, he admitted, but not as cruel as lonely nights. Her gaze softened, catching the edge of his own hesitation, his vulnerability. You need not fear loneliness anymore, she said. I am here. He swallowed hard. The words settled over him, and he felt a stirring deep in his chest, something he had spent years ignoring, hope. And more than hope, something quieter, steadier, something like love, though he had never dared name it. She moved slightly closer, until their shoulders touched, then shifted again until their hands met. Tentative at first, then firm. He felt the pulse of life, the heat, the weight of her fingers interlacing with his. He wanted to speak, to declare everything he had never dared to, but the words were trapped behind a wall of awe and tenderness. She whispered, You are different than others. You see with more than your eyes. You act with more than your hands. He nodded, overwhelmed. Ain't sure I deserve it. You do, she said simply. You have been patient, you have been true. That is more than most men achieve. He wanted to tell her he had never felt so alive. He wanted to tell her he had never known anyone like her. That in a world full of mocking, her presence was the only thing that made sense. But instead, he tightened his grip on her hand, letting the silence speak for him. They stayed that way until the moon dipped low, until the night whispered into the valley like a lullaby. And when sleep finally claimed them, it was side by side, connected, not through force or fear, but through the quiet choice to be together. Morning found them still close, waking to a world bathed in soft sunlight. He watched her stretch, her hair falling across her shoulders, and realized he would follow her anywhere. Across plains, into canyons, across rivers, he would go, because she was the first person who had chosen him without mockery, without judgment, without reservation. And he would choose her in return. They rode onward through the valley, the day growing hotter, the sun high in the sky. She guided him to a small ridge overlooking distant mesas. The land sprawled endlessly, and for the first time, he didn't feel small. He didn't feel like the man the saloon mocked. He felt like someone alive, someone worthy, someone chosen, and choosing in turn. The rest of the summer stretched before them in a haze of heat and dust and life. Days were filled with riding, tending the land, sharing stories and songs, teaching and learning. Nights were filled with quiet touches, whispers, the firelight dancing across their faces, and the shared warmth of a bond growing steadily, fiercely. The cowboy discovered that bravery wasn't about guns or brawn, it was about protecting someone, standing for what mattered, keeping faith in the heart. And she discovered that trust wasn't weakness, it was a gift, rare and precious, given to those who deserved it. The prairie, harsh and unyielding, became their shared world. The sun-baked earth beneath their boots and horses' hooves was no longer oppressive. It was a canvas for life they were building together, small and fragile, yet real. Each day was a test, each night a promise. And in the quiet moments, when the wind whispered and the stars blinked overhead, he realized he had never been alone. He had just been waiting, for someone like her, for a summer like this, for a chance to be seen, and to see in return. The last days of summer stretched thin across the prairie, a golden haze that made the hills shimmer, and the wind hummed softly through the grass. The Cowboy and the Apache girl moved together as if they had always been one, tending the land, mending fences, coaxing the cattle along the ridges. Their work was steady, quiet, but it carried a rhythm that belonged to them alone. Each sunrise brought the promise of something new, each sunset left them with the satisfaction of surviving another day, together. One evening, after a long ride, they returned to their small cabin. The sun hung low, casting long shadows across the doorframe as he opened it. She dismounted, brushing dust from her leggings, and looked at him with that calm, steady gaze he had grown to cherish. "You saved me," she said softly, voice carrying over the quiet land. "But you have also given me something more. A home. A choice. A life." He felt his chest tighten, emotion catching him off guard. "A life," he repeated. "Seems I never thought I'd get one like this." "You deserve it," she said firmly. "And more than that, you deserve to be seen as you truly are." He looked down at his hands, scarred from labor and dust, and realized she had always seen him, not the man others mocked, not the quiet boy in the saloon's laughter, but the man he had always been, strong, patient, gentle, and true. The fire they lit that night flickered warm across their faces. She leaned against him, and he felt a calm he had never known, a stillness that made the stars seem closer, the wind softer, the prairie somehow smaller and safe. He whispered, I thought no one would ever want me." Her lips brushed his cheek. "I do," she said simply. "I choose you." He couldn't speak. He could only hold her closer, letting the warmth of the fire and her presence fill every empty space he had carried for so long. For the first time, he didn't feel small, unworthy, or incomplete. He felt whole. Days passed, the prairie shifting from golden haze to sunburnt brilliance. They moved through it side by side, their lives intertwined by trust, care, and a deepening bond neither had expected but both welcomed. The town began to whisper again, as it always did, but their opinions no longer mattered. The Cowboy who had been mocked and dismissed had become a man chosen for his heart, and the Apache girl who had faced danger alone had found a companion who would stand with her against any threat. Together they laughed, sang, worked, and rested, carving out a life not defined by the harsh judgment of others, but by the quiet loyalty they shared. The land around them was harsh, but it had become a place of home. The prairie winds that once carried loneliness now carried a song of belonging. On the final night of that long summer, they sat by the fire outside the cabin, hands intertwined. The embers glowed softly, reflecting in their eyes. Neither spoke for a long time, letting the quiet hold them. Finally, she whispered, "Do you know why I chose you?" He shook his head. "I reckon I don't." "Because you were true," she said. "Because your heart has always been clean, even when the world tried to shame it. Because you saw me without fear, without lies, without judgment. That is why I chose you." He swallowed, his voice catching. "And I choose you too." The prairie stretched endlessly around them, the stars shining overhead, the wind soft and warm. In that vast, unforgiving land, two hearts had found each other. And in finding one another, they had discovered the strength, courage, and love that made life worth living. They stayed there long into the night, the fire's glow dancing across their faces, their hearts beating together in quiet harmony. The summer had ended, but something greater had begun, a bond that would endure, unshaken by ridicule, danger, or time. They had chosen each other, and in doing so, they had found a home in each other's hearts. And in the wide, sun-baked expanse of the frontier, their story endured, proof that what the world mocks can sometimes be the very thing that makes love true.